Hello and welcome to Fast Effect Double Speed Magic the Gathering. Here we have Jared on a four-color control list. Uh, some people might call this like a four-color Bant versus Matt on Eureka, a list that he's put in just so much work with over the last few years. Veil of Summer, the printing that kind of inspired the departure from Red in a Show and Tell deck, instead running Eureka for Sneak Attack. So really leaning into the show and tell aspect of it much more heavily. That also, you're hoping to land omniscience that way the majority of the time, which does greatly help when you're talking about playing against the white decks of the format. We have a Sylvan Library for Jared and an Ice Fang Codal. That'll outdraw Sylvan for a very short window here, as from this point forward, Jared's going to get to see a whole lot of extra cards. Every shuffle is going to be very high value. Next draw step's going to see 3 new cards. Library, printed way back in Legends, still amongst the best options out there for card selection. Every single time, draw step, so powerful. And in matchups where you don't really care about your life total, or in the case where you're gaining life with Uro, just turning that into actual raw card advantage as well, paying the 4 life, getting those extra cards into. Not just about cards quality, it's also card quantity. Does able to fetch basic lands. Current build of Eureka, a ton of basics, really tuned to try and deal with Delver. Seeing Ice Fang Codal, lots of basics. The addition of Uro, card that really doesn't have a ton of synergy with the main line, but gives you a devastating plan B. And a valid one. I mean, just Uro on his own can completely close out games. Vision here for Matt, trying to pull the combo together. Plenty of mana available for both players. Fought over. Paired with a Force of Will. Press down. Matt readying basic forest or Veil of Summer. 1 mana Cryptic Command here. Jared's going to force back pitching Shark Typhoon. That is going to be the end of that conversation. 4 cards for 2. Wasn't for that Sylvan, that would be a absolute slam dunk. Now we have Mystic Sanctuary being fetched, which allows this intuition to go back to the top of the library and give Matt another shot at it, with Jared having expended double force on the last turn. Matt representing enough mana to potentially win, but no, he passes the turn. Wouldn't have been surprised to see a intuition go ahead and find 3 show and tells, but perhaps other necessary cards not in hand. We have a Force of Will stopping Jace the Mind Sculptor. Now Matt feels comfortable throwing the intuition out there. Now that Jared is tapped out, might even have Days backup from here. We'll see. Grabbing Gristlebrand, Emerald in. Show and tell. Oh, putting in a Hull Breacher. That is unfortunate. Gristlebrand enters the battlefield with not much of a useful ability. A7 life to give your opponent 7 treasures thanks to this Hull Breacher. Devastating card to put in off of Matt's Show and Tell. Going down to 2. Digging for an answer for the 7/7 flying lifelink. This is still a problem. Even the Ice Fang is a potential issue here at down to just 2 life. So Jared is fortunate to have had an answer to Emrakul, but might still be dead to the 7/7 body. No, we have a Swords to Plowshares. And a Prismatic ending. So both creatures exiled. 3 damage comes across. Jared may have stabilized. Tremendous amount of effort going into getting all of those permanents onto the battlefield. I mean, not typical for Eureka to recover from this type of situation. Uro would be not super exciting given Hull Breacher on the other side simply be a large body that can gain some life. Another endurance. Beats escalate here. Force of will to stop that. Jared's not going to really care there. He's happy to get a Force of will out of Matt's hand. He has the inevitability right now. Needs to keep leaning into this board state until Matt is eventually KO'd by this pair of creatures. Maybe Uro gets in the mix. Doesn't really matter. Jared just needs to hold on. Getting that Force of will out of the hand. Very welcome. Playing around Ice Fang at this point. Not swinging with the Hull Breacher. Hard casting Omniscience. We have a hard cast Omniscience. Matt is down to 2. We have any no permanent, no way to dig with Ponder or Brainstorm. That is wild, though. See a hard cast Omniscience in this matchup. That is crazy. That had a bunch of live draws there. Cunning Wish, Bristlebrand, Emrakul, any one of those would have been very, very dangerous. Particularly the Cunning Wish and the Emrakul. We are on to the next one. Fetching up a basic island for a Preordain. Pretty crazy first game. Got a Brainstorm. Fetch land, best combo in the game. Optimizing his hand going into turn 3. Preordain, Ponder, and Brainstorm. 3 cantrips played for the first 3 mana. Got to imagine Matt's hand's going to be pretty solid here. Jared fetching up a Triome. Forget about availability of the Tri-lands to be fetched now. Depending on the speed of the format, those could become incredibly important. Matchups like the 4-color control mirror, those lands coming into play tapped, not necessarily as important as the access to a variety of different mana. Now we've got Uro fearlessly cast, in addition to Matt's list. During the battlefield, drawing a card, setting up the potential for the Titan to show up and run away with the game. Jared has to respond to this. He has to either have access to something like a bounce spell or Swords to Plowshares, or throw a counter spell at it, which feels pretty terrible given how easy it is to get to that escape cost. Just 4 mana total, And then those 5 other cards to exile. It's not uncommon for Uro to be able to be cast multiple times out of the graveyard if the opponent does have some type of counterspell. It's really not how you want to handle this creature. It has an Uro of his own. On the other side, if you're talking about a card like Swords to Plowshares, trading 1 for 1, excuse me, also pretty disastrous. They get that ETB trigger, they get to draw a card, put in a land. Swords to Plowshares it. You're trading, getting a 2 for 1. Opposite direction. We have a Ponder for Matt. And just a whole bunch of lands in play. Does make that happen. Ran Urborg, he'd have no problem taking the required black mana to just hard cast Emrakul, it would seem. Last game, hard casting Omniscience. Teferi shows up, bounces the Uro. Comes right back down, however. Tell you, this can't cast spells, or can only cast spells at sorcery speed. Very, very damaging for the blue mirror. All of their tricks are cast aside for the most part. You're really looking at needing to tap out, use all your mana turn. So things like Brainstorm, where previously you could wait until your opponent's end step and make the most informed decision. Instead, you just have to fire them off during your own turn. Fury wreaks havoc on the mirror. That's mana base getting swole here. 7 mana. Like Intuition and Show and Tell and have Veil backup. Asking Uro to come out and play. What Matt can do, Walker and Uro, probably best to just win the game rather than try and answer these permanents. Not gonna lie, that is generally the best line. Permanents can be bothersome. Just win the game. Seems to be better. Starting with the Brainstorm. Oh, and how good is Veil of Summer? Jams a Veil. Jams another one. Force a negation on the first one. Interesting that Jared opted to pitch for the Force of Negation. The second one is sticking. Now we've got a Show and Tell. Veil, you know, Teferi's an incredibly brutal magic card. But here we've got Cunning Wish off of this Omniscience, and that is going to be a wrap. Take note, Blue Mages. These Veil of Summers, even if you have a Teferi out there, they do not need to use them in response. I mean, they can just run out a Veil of Summer preemptively, and you have to counter it, or the rest of their stuff is going to be uncounterable. There, I had a pair of Veils. Second one even got to draw a card. Brutal. Even if Jared had another counter, he would have had to expend it on that Veil of Summer. And Matt just goes for it anyways. I mean, sometimes you just have to go for it, even if it's possible that your opponent can counter it. And certainly, making your opponent counter 2 Veils, totally fine. I'd imagine Jared felt fairly good in that position with the Teferi out, counter magic in hand. Nope. Veil of Summer. Actually, a ridiculous magic card with only 1 mana. Harrison's Decryptic Command are not overblown. It's really the reason why Matt is running this list. I would argue a Veil of Summer is not strong in the meta, that you just would not want to play Eureka. It's a 4 of. Absolutely hellacious versus things like Hymn to Torok and Thoughtseize, of course, which is something that show and tell decks can really struggle against. The ability to rip your opponent's hand apart matters a lot when you're talking about a deck that needs to get a show and tell and something to put in. Very different than, say, a test deck where maybe if you've got enough mana on board, a single card like a Wishclaw Talisman just straight up wins. You could have like 6 mana total, just a couple of lands, a Lotus Petal, and an LED, and you top deck a Wishclaw Talisman, and you just win. You just go get your Ad Nauseam and cast it, assuming your opponent can't counter it. It's going to be game over. Show and tell decks do not have that ability. There's no single card that's actually just going to straight up win for them, barring, I suppose, if we want to get a little ridiculous, we could argue that Uro could do that. This current build, I suppose if you have 7 mana, maybe 10 mana, you could do something like play Uro, escape Uro, and then have drawn into Show and Tell plus Bristlebrand. I mean, that's the type of mental gymnastics you'd have to do to figure out how to win with just a single card in Eureka. Very different than many combo decks. No Echo of Aeons or anything like that to bail out the situation. Now we have a Mystical Dispute stopping Rainstorm. Carpet of Flowers, a super powerful accelerant. Worst case scenario, this card is just solid ramp. Best case scenario, it is ramp gone wild, as it's going to give you a extra mana for each island your opponent controls. Here, Jared's got a couple, so this thing's actually producing 2 mana, just like a Soul Ring, either main phase. Just going to keep getting worse from here as well. We have a Surgical Extraction, interesting. And Jared actually has double Surgical. Didn't catch what that was actually defending here. Hopefully we see the cards go through, but there's still Show and Tell Emrakul left in hand, so I don't know how good Jared's going to feel about this Surgical resolving. I'm really not sure what value he's getting. Oh, it's just Uro? Alright, so there was an Uro in the graveyard. Only 1 in the deck. Show and Tell gets stopped. Like we're going to have a second Show and Tell. It's time for Emrakul. Jared, no permanent to put in. And he's going to need probably Jace the Mind Sculptor or Teferi, some type of Planeswalker. Not going to be targeting Emrakul with an instant or sorcery. No colored spells. And there we go. So no answer to the Emrakul. Shows up hard-fought match between 2 very different decks.